Okay. All right, everyone. Well, first of all, I just want to say how grateful we all are, all the people that were involved in this process. We have Frontline Freelance Register, ACOS Alliance, the Vance Center, and then many freelancers who gave us feedback throughout this entire process. So we're so happy that we can share this with you all, and that all of these organizers brought together such an amazing audience. So we're so excited to be here and dive into this. Um, so just to kind of start us off, I did want to start with how something that our team wrote up to kind of get you in the scenario that got us thinking about these issues. So an international news story is breaking, and a freelancer in the region has a great angle on the shoot. And they email an editor quickly, say they have a story, and the editor's quick reply is, "Sounds good. How soon can you get it to me?" This is a really common scenario, and more often than not, these kind of hastily agreed upon assignments are agreed upon over email or WhatsApp instead of the formal process that exists. We know this is a challenge for journalists around the world, and that when stories are breaking, it's really hard to have any leverage or when dealing with a big news organization. So we wanted to develop some tools for freelancers to have some legalese on hand, and to really start thinking through all of the safety issues that can be absorbed by the freelancer if, God forbid, something happens while working on these assignments. So with that said, when we think about freelance safety, we often think about hostile environment trainings or schlepping flak jackets across international borders, kidnapping drills, all of these crazy preparations that we all do. But contracts have a very important safety function as well. In fact, because they establish not just a media organization's expectations of the freelancers, but also their obligations to them, contracts probably play a greater role in establishing the necessary safeguards and resources, or dangerous lack thereof, than just about everything else. So that's how we started thinking about contracts. And so what we're going to go over today is both contracts and then insurance, which is such an important part of contracts as well. So starting with contracts, what is our model freelance publishing agreement? We're going to walk you through this new tool that we have that is, immensely valuable for freelancers who of course, don't have their own legal departments. Why this is relevant to our safety. We think it's not just an issue of fairness and professionalism. It really is an issue of safety, and we want freelancers to be empowered to stand up for themselves and make that point when they're doing their negotiations. We're going to review our guide with you all, and that's what I included the links to, so that if anyone wants to go into the details and follow along, we'll be able to. And then we're going to get to insurance. ACOS has worked really hard, as have many different organizations, to find insurance that will be valuable to freelance and local journalists around the world. We know that is the most exhausting part of this job, trying to find insurance that works for whatever you're doing. So ACOS has some really great recommendations and has been working on these issues, but we also want to go through how you can think about these insurance plans so you can make the best decision for yourselves and your teams. And yeah, then we'll go over some other resources and then move on to Q&A. Oops. Okay, there we go. So to start, what is this model contract and why do we need this? So Frontline Freelance Register, I'm just going to call it FFR for the rest of this, ACOS Alliance, and partnered with the Vance Center for International Justice to create this model contract, or model freelance publishing agreement. The idea is to develop tools for journalists to negotiate safe, fair, and professional contracts. This came because FFR and ACOS both work with hundreds of journalists around the world, and the number one complaint that we get is freelancers not being paid on time. And of course, that does impact people's safety, because it makes journalists make decisions in the field based on pay, as opposed to the best safety measures. So that's an issue that we hear all the time, but also in more severe, dangerous scenarios, we've seen how journalists end up falling through the cracks legally because of the kind of boilerplate contracts that most news organizations use. So we wanted to make sure that our freelancers had something that they could point to, partnered with an organization like ACOS Alliance that works with so many press freedom organizations as well as media organizations to say this is something that is, has a stamp of approval from your peer media organizations, and something that would empower journalists to point to this document, and then also kind of pressure newsrooms to keep up with the best practices of within the industry. So in terms of contracts as a safety issue, again, this is something that we originally developed for FFR's journalists, which are regular or journalists that work in hostile environments. Most of the boilerplate contracts that media organizations present you when they commission an assignment don't include all sorts of provisions that a freelancer in those hostile environments would need to have reviewed and have clear answers on to be totally safe. So we developed this contract with a bunch of different modules so that people can, specifically for freelancers working in, and local journalists working in hostile environments. But given COVID-19 this year and how all journalists are now working in hostile environments, having to do some of the same preparation that journalists in hostile environments have to do in thinking about their safety and the safety of their sources and their teams, this is something that we think elements of this contract can help you all think about some of the risks and also negotiate on a range of issues with your commissioning editors and producers. What the actual model contract is, it's a modular contract that has sample legal language in it on a range of different issues. And we've also developed a sample contract that you could even present to a media organization in the absence of them presenting you with a contract. We've included a bunch of different versions of language so that you can negotiate what's best for you on an assignment. There's unfortunately not one size fits all, but our contract was developed thinking about how freelancers don't have a legal department. So what are terms that are most favorable for them and their safety, and kind of ranking by different color coding what's most safe and most favorable to freelancers, what's maybe a compromise that you might think about if you really want to work for that news organization. And then lastly, language that exists in contracts that you really want to stay away from in most situations because it really disadvantages you as an individual. Again, this is something, if an outlet doesn't have a sufficient contract for you, this is something that you really could present them and once again kind of lobby for yourself through the partnerships that ACOS Alliance has developed by saying, again, this is not your opinion on what you think you deserve. This is what industry standard is in terms of safety and professionalism. So we want you to think about that and really, try to use the tools that we've created. The key issues that we address in this contract are payment, structure and timelines, expenses, insurance, communication, and then dealing with HR, finance, or legal at the commissioning organization. We developed a toolkit that has 3 elements: the full model contract, which is like 12 pages long and has sample legalese for every one of these sections. Then we created a guide that I'm going to go through with you all today, and then an actual sample contract that you could present back to a media organization. So again, on these 3, I just want to direct you, if anybody wants to follow along, the link that I provided, the first one that says ACOS Alliance /contracts, that page has the 3 documents on it. And what we're going to go through today is the guide, but the other 2 links are on that page as well. So again, we have 3 of these documents in the toolkit that we've prepared. The first one, the model freelance publishing agreement, this is what it looks like. But there are 11 pages of this. And again, it's color coded with the favorability to the freelancer. We're not going to go through every single this very dense document today, because it is a little dense, and that's why we made a guide that's easier for a journalist who doesn't have a legal background to use. But what you can find with this actual publishing agreement is if you go through, let's say you use the guide and you realize, okay, you're looking at the contract and you want to negotiate better terms as far as expenses. You can go into this model freelance publishing agreement, go down to expenses, and truly just pull some of the language on whatever option you want. And you could email that back to your commissioning producer and editor. Again, a lot of commissioning producers and editors don't have a legal background either, and they're just giving you what their legal department tells them to give out. But this will empower you to say, like, here, listen, there's other options that we could be doing. And again, this is industry standard best practice. The second is the guide. Now, this is what we'll be going through today. And this is a 2-page document. And this is the one I would download right now if you want to follow along. It goes through the main issues and kind of just gives the overview of the different options, and starting with what's most favorable to a freelancer and ending with what's least favorable. And then this is the model freelance publishing agreement. This is something that you could, use as a template to send back to a media organization, present them if they don't give you a contract. And again, we're going to keep, pushing this and trying to, promote this document and the issues that we've been working on. But this is something people can use in the short term when they are dealing with a news organization that doesn't have a contract, or doesn't have a contract for you, or doesn't have some of the key provisions that we all should be concerned about. So I'm going to start with the section. I'm just going to go through the guide. Again, because the guide is the less dense version of the legal document that you all have access to. And this guide, I'm going to go section by section to explain why each section matters, and what we heard from freelancers that raised concern for us about safety and professionalism and fairness, and why we put these different provisions into work with our attorneys to put these different provisions into this contract. So fee, obviously it can just be a specific amount or a day rate essentially. But what we've heard from different freelancers, often there's a complaint about from print journalists that it's like $1 per word, and that word amount can change. There's complaints about the amount of time. So we encourage, in our freelance, or in the publishing agreement, it kind of shows how different freelancers of different mediums are negotiating their pay and how they set up their fee. And I think that's something important for everybody to consider. If you're a print journalist and you're working for 5 months on a project and that keeps getting delayed for reasons outside your power, this is a section that we want people to think about. Also in this section, usually if you're dealing with all of the safety issues that our contract includes, this first section, the amount of your fee might change based on other sections in this document. So based on the payment timeline, based on the expenses, based on the insurance, if they're not willing to provide you with some of these things, then of course your rate should go up. And this is where you would include it. The next section is payment. Of course, that's the biggest issue for freelancers and local journalists around the world, is having no power to speed up the finance departments of these big media organizations or local media organizations. So what's important and different about our contract is, you'll see option A, a company pays the full amount when the contributor submits the work and the relevant invoice. The key word here is submits, because we know that nobody can control when a publication actually publishes your work. So that's the big change that we have wanted to incorporate, that really centers with freelancers. That is something that is not our problem. If they're delayed on when they're going to publish that is not a cost that a freelancer should be absorbing and waiting for when they can fit it in. So that is why we put that as most relevant. And again, that keyword is submits, an invoice versus published. The second, a company pays a portion of the fee when the contributor submits the work, and then an invoice and pays the rest upon publication. So you can kind of see with this section how, like, A would be the best for a freelancer, B is some kind of compromise, but again, kind of insisting like something should be paid upon submission, because it is not in the freelancer's control when a piece is published. The company pays the hourly, weekly, monthly fee for the time worked as described in invoice submitted by the contributor. So this also has a section about a kill fee. And in general, this is something that freelancers are really frustrated about. A lot of organizations don't provide kill fees at all and have you work on something forever and then just back out of it, or they're having you submit an entire final product with without and then killing it for reasons, again, that have nothing to do with the quality of your work and only paying you a portion of that. So we have language in here also about dealing with kill fees and payment structure to make sure that this is something that news organizations don't take advantage of. Again, in any other industry that has a freelance worker, if you do the contract, you give somebody a product and it's finished, they can't back out of the order once it's done. So we do want people to start thinking about freelancing in that way in terms of the product, and kind of reframing how our industry has been very unprofessional in dealing with freelance journalists. Oops. Expenses. So expenses, this is one that has so much to do with safety, and really one of the key provisions for, especially for frontline freelance registers, journalists, but journalists everywhere, but it's something very important to us. Expenses, oftentimes media organizations reimburse you on expenses after the fact. In hostile environments, the cost of working safely is often extremely high. And many media organizations do send your expenses in advance. That for safety reasons, beyond professional and ethical reasons, for safety reasons, FFR's position is that advancing expenses is mandatory. People can't be making decisions based on what's in their bank account when they're in a hostile environment. So because some finance department in a major city is not able to process these things. So the way we've written the expenses is that the company and the contributor agree on a budget ahead of time. The company advances the expenses, and then the company reimburses, or then the contributor returns the unused amount if that's the situation. B, the contributor seeks reimbursement for actually incurred expenses afterwards. In some assignments, that will make sense if it's like a small expense or something. But again, for anything high risk, especially again with COVID, there are new costs associated with working safely. So our position as an organization that stands up for freelancers' safety first and foremost is that those expenses in advance, if it's something that a freelancer can't cover or is strained to cover, it should be advanced. The next one, insurance. Okay, so there's kind of three options. This concerns who gets and pays for the appropriate insurance. The company, ideally, the company will enroll the freelancer in the insurance program and cover the cost. There are many media organizations who can do this. So sometimes you'll hear from organizations that they don't know, but it really is the responsibility of a commissioning editor, producer to know the insurance plan, to know if somebody and if freelancers can get covered. We find this so often that commissioning editors and producers don't have that information. And that's why ACOS works with media organizations as well. And unfortunately, we do think freelancers through this contract can educate commissioning producers and editors that they should have that information. And again, that is just unprofessional and irresponsible not to have that when commissioning freelancers. We do need those answers about insurance because otherwise the company could reimburse the cost of insurance that the contributor gets. So if you have a better sense or already have some kind of insurance, the company, if they can't cover you, they should reimburse that as an expense. Or again, if they don't provide that, then you should raise your fee to include the cost of your insurance. This should be something that news organizations start to understand is part of the cost of doing the job, because it's not an optional part of doing the job safely. The last is the contributor obtains and pays for insurance. So again, you can see A, B, C based on favorability to freelancer and least favorable. Then rights. I'm not going to go through this whole section, but it just breaks down for you what we hear from our members and our colleagues about the different ways to think about your rights and what you're giving away, all the ways to break it down. And then the last part, B, the contributor giving the ownership of the work entirely as work for hire. We know that's really, really common, but it is forfeiting the most rights to your work. So we always want to highlight that. Although it's really common, we know many freelancers will choose that option, but option A is breaking it down so that you have the ability to sell your work to other news outlets in a way that's non-compete, but also allows you to make a living and get your work to different audiences around the world. These two are about your status. So as a freelancer, you are not employed, and in some countries that means you're not entitled to the same protections as an employee. That includes things like anti-discrimination measures and sexual harassment. So this is something that we've unfortunately found from so many members in our community. And when you're a freelancer, you don't have an easy person to contact in HR at that news organization. And in fact, that news organization really has no legal obligation to deal with you as somebody that's a contractor in most cases. So what we've included in our model contract is a space where there is language that says essentially, this is the point of contact if there are any anti-discrimination or sexual harassment issues. Also a point of contact in finance, and also a point of contact in legal. So that way, the freelancer who doesn't want to, maybe burn a bridge with a commissioning editor or producer who had nothing to do with the problem or something, or maybe they did and they need to notify the news organization. This gives a freelancer lines of communication to different parts of the company so that they could report these issues. And this, again, unfortunately, it really is a huge problem, and our freelancers are even more vulnerable. Freelance journalists are even more vulnerable than journalists who are employed because we don't have the same benefits as employees. Data protection, obviously this will range around the world, and we do have a breakdown in the main model contract, but just so everyone knows that in most of the contracts that we reviewed from that media organizations are putting out into the world right now, there's sections on retaining notes and retaining your sources. And that's because theoretically some of these contracts have language that if the news organization gets sued for libel or defamation, it could require some of your original notes and your records from this. Also, there's some language in some of these contracts that protects the news organization from a lawsuit at all, and it could get handed down to the individual freelancer. So this is something that's appalling and unfortunately become more common in recent years. We've started to see them more often in these contracts. So we've included a section in our contracts to deal with how you protect yourself or counter indemnify a news organization. The last three, just quickly, is about commitments. These are, a lot of the contracts have this section. It's basically about the professionalism and best practices, termination. Again, this has to do with the kill fees. Again, requires payment for all work done beforehand and reimbursement of associated expenses. Again, in our main model contract, we have a lot of language for kill fees and how to deal with them. The last piece, the agreement provides that New York law governs and that disputes will be resolved in court. So this contract is made for journalists all over the world, and all of the different provisions are really relevant in any market that you're freelancing in. These are basic things you would have as a freelancer anywhere, or should be talking about when you're trying to negotiate anywhere. But the reason we included New York law is because so many media organizations, if they're not based here, they have a branch here. A lot of the big media organizations that really have no excuse for delayed payments or poor labor habits. So those are kind of some of the media organizations that we want to hold, most responsible for adhering to best practices. And they have offices in New York. This is relevant because New York City has a law called the Freelance Isn't Free Act, which has penalties for any company that pays after 30 days. Like, that's the law, you can't pay after 30 days. And if they have more than one complaint submitted against them, there are penalties. And this is also relevant because it's not just American citizens that can file a complaint. Anyone in the world could file a complaint against the news organization if they have an office in New York. So, and it's not just American outlets like BBC, Al Jazeera, different news outlets have offices in New York. So we want freelancers. So that's why we wrote this into our first version of the model contract, because we hope it's something that our journalists everywhere will start using. Anybody that's working with international news organizations, again, it's just rare to find these protections that include penalties to media organizations that don't follow basic professional and fair standards and adhere to their own contracts. Now moving on to safety, moving on to insurance. So ACOS doesn't see its role as promoting a specific product, but instead identifying different options that fulfill needs identified by journalists, freelance journalists, and local journalists around the world. The top things that come up when they've been working, or ACOS has been working on this for years, so many partners, and the issues are always quality, cost, and geographical limitations. So ACOS has identified 2 options that provide a basic emergency insurance at a low cost without geographical limitations. This has been such a struggle for so many years, so we're really excited at least to tell you about these 2 options, but they don't cover everything. So part of our discussion about insurance today is thinking about what specifically do you need for your assignment and the kinds of questions you can ask and best practices you can do moving forward to make sure that you have the insurance that's appropriate for whatever assignment you're doing. So the 2 options we want to highlight are insurance for journalists. It covers journalists traveling to any country, including conflict zones of any nationality. You can purchase it by the week. It includes accidental death and disablement, emergency medical evacuation, and repatriation. This can be purchased outside the country or while you're on assignment. That last piece is pretty important because a lot of insurance plans you can't purchase once you're already on assignment, and we know that assignments change or get extended often. So that was a very important element. Also, of course, that it includes every nationality to every country, including conflict zones. The second one, insurance for local media. This is so huge. And this is something that we really want media organizations to know about as well as journalists everywhere. This is insurance that covers any nationality, any person of any nationality anywhere in the world, including their country of residence, by the day for $7.50. So this is so important because this you can start it, or you can insure your entire team down to drivers, fixers, anybody you're working with. That this is something we've needed for so long, and not all media organizations have the capacity to make sure everybody's covered, and they'll, in best case scenario, if something goes wrong, that news organization will take responsibility. But oftentimes they really have no legal obligation to in some of these situations, and we don't want any of our colleagues to be left hanging in any situation. So this is a really affordable, let me go back. This is a really affordable option, and it includes accidental death, medical evacuation, and repatriation. So again, we just want people to know that these two options exist because they're at least a base level of coverage that people can know about. And of course, ACOS signatories, and this is something you've mentioned to news organizations when you're commissioning and having these conversations about insurance, you can encourage them to join our coalition of media organizations that want to be following best practices, and then they'll get a discount when they insure you guys under these programs. So then key considerations to think about for insurance. So to properly assess plans and communicate effectively with insurance provider, I've included a risk assessment and communication plan from Roy Peck Trust. So Roy Peck has these amazing downloadable forms that I'll get to on the next page. But basically, this is a best practice for all journalists on any assignment. Having a risk assessment and communication plan is, so important. And it's going to help make sure our community can help each other if something goes wrong. And in terms of insurance, it will be your guide for when you want to communicate with your insurance provider. You'll have all that information aggregated. You'll be able to think really clearly and even share that document to make sure that you're covered and that they don't pull anything last minute or something, that you have this information in advance, you're covered. So for consideration, some questions that we wanted to review today, but also there are some sample Q&A prompts via Roy Peck Trust once again. So does this provider have experience working with journalists? What documentation will you need? So do you need to bring receipts back from a hospital in whatever country? Will they pay you, or do you pay for it, or do they pay the hospital directly? How does this reimbursement process work? Is there a 24-hour emergency line? Does it cover natural disasters or terrorism? Some of these things have, because it's medical or emergency, it doesn't necessarily include these things. So those are just some questions to kind of get your head thinking about how thorough we really should all be with the fine print of these organizations. But the best thing is to have your plan ready, review some of these questions to get thinking about it, and then get on the phone with the insurance provider in advance. Two other points with insurance providers. So experience and relevant safety trainings can help individuals secure insurance. I also put some limitations. So most plans right now don't cover kidnapping and ransom or COVID in their medical and evacuation or treatment sections. So when looking for K&R insurance, search for crisis response. And then we just did want to make a note that Battle Face Insurance covers COVID right now, with the exclusion of travel cancellations and for individuals over the age of 57. We know journalists and media organizations have been having such a hard time finding insurance during COVID. So we're highlighting that one. And and Elizabeth is on this call, so maybe at the end I'll ask her if we had found any other places covering COVID, but I know it was just such a struggle at the beginning, but Battle Face has been identified as one provider. So moving forward, ACOS is also interested in having conversations about insurance related to trauma and PTSD, as well as some legal issues. So this is something, again, we need the community to be involved and engaged in these issues, because we know these are the things that kind of affect people, but we definitely want to get more people involved who are interested in leading and helping out on these issues. I did want to highlight some really important resources. So Roy Peck Trust offers downloadable templates for the following different things that journalists might need. So a risk assessment and security protocol template, including a guide, similar to the toolkit we've created for the contract. They have the big risk assessment, but then they have a guide if you've never completed one before. Communications plan, a proof of life template, digital risk assessment, among others. So these templates will allow you to aggregate that information so you can have a really thorough conversation with a media organization, or with a provider as well as your media organization, and just, to keep yourself safe, and, make sure that have a document so all of your colleagues can, come and help you if anything goes wrong. with these tools in terms of the risk assessment and security protocol template. All of these things, again, they're something that people who maybe work in hostile environment or more dangerous countries on dangerous stories might be more familiar with. But I did want to include these because of coronavirus. These templates really do help you work through and start thinking about every leg of an assignment. And even though they're, again, originally developed for hostile environments, just with coronavirus and really thinking through all of the different sources and people you come into contact with, we find these, really helpful and something that we can return to and start getting our colleagues as well as our commissioning editors and producers to walk through every step of assignment that to make sure that no harm is caused. So next steps for our community. On the model contract front, what's really exciting is ACOS is about to release an Arabic language version next month. And it's not just in Arabic, they partnered with an attorney in Dubai to also adapt the contract. And so far with this first adaptation and translation, the attorney in Dubai said it pretty much lines up that, these aren't foreign concepts in different parts of the world. These are, what you would need to be a professional, small little company, individual freelancer in dealing, as a little business. So, so we're pleased that it's adapted to Arabic language so far. And also we're gonna be hopefully adapting this in the future. I know next priority is Spanish. And this is something we're, really excited about, but we wanna make sure we have translation as well as adaptation with attorneys in regional hubs that can make sure that this is relevant by region. And then on both fronts, whether it's the model contract agreement or the insurance resources of ACOS, all of this is, ACOS is a community, so is Frontline Freelance Register, so is this community that we have today. And all of these are living documents. So these are developed because we've gotten a lot of freelance feedback, but this industry evolves so quickly. If people start using these materials and they're, whether it's a contract or specific insurance, and you realize there's some, weakness or challenge within it, please let us know. We want to hear any ways that we could improve on these. It's only as good as our community finds these resources. So, so this is, something we're so excited to share with you all, because it's only going to improve the more people use them and the more people in our community are able to give us feedback on these. So again, that's all I have. Oh, I did include resources here at the end that I thought are particularly relevant right now. And I can also drop those into the chat box, but I know that this is shared online after the fact as well. So, but I do have links to everything, because I do think that, whether it's ACOS or RPT or FFR, there are a lot of, or as well as many partners, a lot of the press freedom organizations are working on these issues as well. There's a lot of our allies are just all hands on deck right now, trying to help everybody in this crazy time. And it is also a good time to learn and kind of review and sharpen your skill sets and best practices. So we have a bunch of links here for everything that I addressed today, but also just further reading on these issues, so everyone can use this time. So, but with that, I can wrap and we can start any questions you may all have about anything we reviewed today.
Thank you, Anna, for the amazing presentation. We have a lot of questions. So Linda is going to help us to highlight the questions of all.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to everyone who already posted their questions. If you still have any additional questions, this is the time for you to put them in the chat box so we can ask them all. First, maybe a question that came up earlier already from Ivan. So during the times of COVID-19, it is very important to read the small letters. So what to watch out for when you want to be covered during the COVID times?
I might ask Elizabeth if we have any updates on coverage, because ACOS has been working so hard on these issues. But I guess the first thing that I would look for is anything medical related would usually be in the insurance section. So again, that's why we, aren't just emphasizing to the freelancers that they need to demand transparency on the specific plans and really get in writing, are they covered or not, and write it ideally in a contract like ours. But also ACOS is dealing with media organizations, trainings, and a bunch of different initiatives, because obviously commissioning editors and producers need to understand exactly what's covered. So that's not a specific answer to COVID, but what I've also, that insurance is where that would usually be. But the next thing that I found short-term from freelancers in FFR is that because there's a lot of uncertainty around COVID in terms of insurance, in terms of just the added cost of having to quarantine, and is somebody paying you for those 14 days? You have to quarantine on the front end or the back end of this before you take another assignment. So that was something that our freelancers, are talking a lot about, and budgeting in to their fee or into the expenses section, some kind of flat rate, if not a day rate, for all the days in between that, between assignments. And that's something that, news organizations definitely weren't thinking of at first, and they want to cut a cost on that. We're finding that constantly from our members right now, but it's something that we're all trying to stand firm on, that those extra days are at a cost that we shouldn't have to absorb. So yes, and then of course, obviously the final thing is this kind of goes insurance and the obligations of the news organization. But if an emergency happens, having a answer up front if a news organization is going to cover your medical bills if you contract COVID, or protect you legally. Let's say you spread COVID while reporting. So those are, I guess I just named 3 sections that it would be: payment and expenses, medical or insurance, and then lastly, legal would be the 3 things that, the 3 sections where you could try to get clarity from commissioning editors and producers.